All right, so we are going to first be talking about photography today, and we're going to watch a video together, but I want to make sure that you guys have some of the information for this piece first. So this is Still Life in Studio by an artist named Daguerre. Daguerre is a Frenchman, and he and another artist are really the ones that we credit with coming up with a way to make photography not only a shorter exposure time, but also where the actual photograph starts to have more permanence, So for culture, I mean, it's French, but really this is just what we call early photography. We're talking here about there's only 11 years since the first photographs were taken, so really, really early. The media daguerreotype he named after himself, of course. So early type of photograph. So it says still life. And so it's important to remember that when we're talking about still life, we mean just an arrangement of objects. We mean something that is arranged specifically in a composition by the artist. And these objects could speak to certain themes. A lot of times we'll see this theme of what's called memento mori, something that has to do with a reminder of the brevity of life. It might include flowers, like we saw with Fruit and Insects by Rachel Roush, that Dutch Baroque painting from the 1600s, where we had the emphasis on things that related to fall, and then also things that related to brevity of life. And so still life, it's capturing an arranged scene. And so the artist has set this up in his studio as his content, his arrangement. So we're going to watch this video about the process. And I want you guys to notice how many steps would go into this.
On Monday afternoon, August 19th, 1839, the French Academy of Science held a special meeting to publicly disclose the formula for making daguerreotypes. The technique's inventor, Louis-Jacques Daguerre, had sold his formula to the French government so that it could be made freely available to the public without patent restrictions.
So this is important to note here. Once Daguerre and the chemist he's working with figure out how to make this process doable for maybe not the average person, but for some well-trained people, some initially starts off as a science, right? Then he actually sells that to the French government. The French government pays him so that it can be the process, the technique can be made available to everybody. So there doesn't have to be, some people can do it and some people can't. And so that's important. This idea that he is selling his knowledge so that that idea, that technique can spread. And so photography is going to take off because of Daguerre.
The new medium seized the public's imagination. Daguerreotype mania swept through Paris and across Europe. All who saw daguerreotypes for the first time were equally impressed. Viewers took them to be completely faithful depictions of nature. As quickly as railroads and steamships could travel, news of the invention spread around the world. Nowhere was the daguerreotype more popular than in America, a young democracy and mecca of progress. The daguerreotype studio attracted a wide cross-section of Americans. People from all walks of life could now afford to have their portraits made, and they did. For all their popularity, producing daguerreotypes was a labor-intensive process, requiring a lot of equipment and skill. The daguerreotype plate is made of copper, faced with silver. To secure it and make it easier to handle, the plate is placed silver side up on an adjustable block. In order to prepare the plate for exposure, it has to be polished. In this modern demonstration of the daguerreotype process, the daguerreotypist applies a small amount of white powder, called Rothenstone, to a cloth moistened with dilute alcohol. The daguerreotypist applies the alcohol and Rothenstone to the surface of the plate using a consistent motion. The daguerreotypist sprinkles a fine red powder known as rouge onto a long padded stick. The plate is then buffed using the rouge. Polishing the plate in the same direction improves viewing of the highly reflective surface. The plate is then buffed a second time with a clean padded stick in order to increase its reflectivity. It is now ready to be made light sensitive.
So this, he has to do this for
the daguerreotypist
each
places the polished
picture.
plate face down in a sensitizing box, which contains a small amount of iodine crystals. In about 15 to 45 seconds, fumes from the iodine react with the silver, coating the plate with silver iodine. This process will then be repeated with fumes from bromine or quickstuff. From the sensitizing box, the daguerreotypist removes the plate, now coated with bromoiodide of silver. The plate is now light sensitive and ready for use in the camera. The daguerreotypist places the light sensitive plate in a plate holder with the coated side down. It is then secured into place. The viewing glass is lifted out of the camera and replaced with the loaded plate holder. The dark slide is removed to make the plate accessible for the exposure. To make the exposure, the daguerreotypist removes the lens cap. Early exposure times were notoriously long and sometimes uncomfortable, often taking more than 20 seconds. To ensure that the sitter did not move during the exposure, an 1840 Boston newspaper recommended the following.
His head should be placed on a semicircle of iron fitted to the back of the chair. His arms may be arranged at pleasure. He should fix his eyes on some well-defined object in any direction which he may prefer. Now, if everything is arranged as it should be, your portrait will often be made even in less than 20 seconds and in the most satisfactory manner.
In the dark, the daguerreotypist develops the plate. A few ounces of liquid mercury are very carefully poured into a flaring iron vessel heated by an alcohol lamp. The exposed plate is removed from the plate holder and placed face down in the mercury chamber, which is heated to approximately 175 degrees Fahrenheit. After mercury vapor reacts with the sensitized silver, the daguerreotypist removes the developed plate. The daguerreotypist then fixes the plate, making it safe for viewing in normal light by pouring on it a solution of hyposulfite of soda. This removes the excess bromo.
So this hyposulfite, they call it hypo initially. That is the material that is so important in this step to be able to preserve the image so that it doesn't turn black over time. So the earliest photos that were taken just like eventually became totally black. You might have seen Polaroids oftentimes will, if y'all have seen a Polaroid print, will oftentimes turn light over time and you lose the quality of the image. So permanence was a big issue at this point in time. We could get a photo, but we couldn't get it to last. So the hypo is really a big invention, or not invention, innovation here. So innovation should definitely be one of your themes.
Iodide of silver, not acted upon by light in the camera. After it has been thoroughly washed, a gilding sand is used to finish the plate. A weak solution of chloride of gold is gently heated over an alcohol lamp. This hardens the plate and adds to the beauty and permanence of the image. After a final cleaning of the plate, the daguerreotype is assembled for safekeeping and display. The plate is put into a shallow hinged case that includes a decorative mat and preserver, both of brass, and a glass cover with taped edges. Daguerreotype studios presented their wares in a variety of cases, ranging from simple leather or cloth-covered wood to elaborate examples of inlaid mother of pearl and molded thermoplastic. Their assembly was an example of industrial age production. The work was often done by women and children, as in this factory, one of the largest of its kind. It is estimated that by the mid-1850s, in the United States alone, approximately 3 million daguerreotypes were produced annually, representing a retail industry of $7.5 million. In 1849, an American author concluded,
In our great cities, a daguerreotypist is to be found in almost every square. It is hard to find a man who has not shadowy faces of his wife and his children done up in morocco and velvet among his household treasures.
All right. So hopefully you guys have all that stuff at home and you can just whip yourself up a photograph. No, don't do that. That would be dangerous. But when we think today about what it takes to take a photo, right? And we just pick up our phone, we snap a photo, move on. It's hard to imagine the the effort, the time, the science that went into developing the first photographs. So I have here a tintype, which is like a daguerreotype. It's really, really small. I was trying to look for the date, and I can't find it, but this would be from, I'll try to find the dates. This is from Glasgow, actually. So this is the UK. And it's really, really tiny. You can kind of see the guy's face right there. So it's printed on a little piece of tin, right? So when we're talking about one of these photographs, you can only get one of them, right? For all that effort, you're getting one thing, not something that can be reproduced. So the uniqueness of each photo, the long exposure time is certainly significant. There's a lot of imperfections in these photos. And so you can see even here with all of the noise, the visual noise that's happening on this photograph. Again, this is all very typical of this time. So we are 1837, we are 2 years before the permanent solution, that hypo, was first used to make these images last better. All right, so there's a big debate going on at this point in time. And it's this idea of, is this an art or is this a science? Well, certainly we could say that it starts off as more of a science when we're really, really thinking about the process, right? The technique. But, you know, mixing oil paint can be a science, and printmaking can certainly be a science. And so that's okay, right? Science and art, that's, I mean, we see that overlapping. If you consider the artist selecting objects to put in a still life, or selecting the arrangement of a person or an outfit or a landscape, then we have to start going, okay, well, this sounds like art, right? It sounds like a communication of an idea. It sounds like a intentional arrangement, visual arrangement. So the process, again, this daguerreotype process was released for free in 1839. If we think about compositions and we want to compare this back, think about a vanitas. Vanitas is, like I was saying with the memento mori. It's a collection of objects. Oftentimes it has something that reminds you of the passage of time. So in this case, this Dutch painting has flowers. Well, we all know that flowers only last a certain period of time and then they wilt away. Certainly cut flowers. There's there's money, a book, there's a skull, which is obviously death. There's an hourglass, there's a compass. So we're seeing things here that kind of represent the idea of moving throughout a life, a journey through a life, right? So we can kind of get that feel from our content of the still life. This is the first known photograph. This was taken by Nisefe, or I'm sorry, yeah, Nisefe Nisef, which is a really unusual name, but he is the guy who really figured out the light sensitive plate. So this was in 1826. He took this utilizing the camera obscura idea that we know has been around since late Renaissance, where you kind of turn a room into a dark room. We saw that with Vermeer, but he figures out the light sensitive plate to record that image. It's very hazy. It's hard to even see what's going on, but this is looking out of the second floor of his home. So out towards the landscape. This exposure, so exposure is how long is the aperture open to allow in light to create an image. So on an iPhone, of course, very, very quick. Digital photography, very, very quick. The exposure, how long the light had to be allowed in for this photograph was 8 hours. 8 hours. That's a really long exposure time. So that's why we don't really see a lot of clarity. You're not going to see, you know, a bird flying by or a person walking by, a horse walking by, because the aperture is open for so long. And so it results in these really grainy images. So in 1826, for our first photograph, 8-hour exposure, right? By the time we get to daguerres like this in 1837, 20 seconds. So we've already gone from 8 hours to 20 seconds, right? In 11 years. So moving ahead for there, definitely. All right. So theme. For our last piece, innovation would be the most probably important theme here with photography. And then you could say definitely this idea of a still life, an arrangement of objects. So still life could be a theme, especially as you're thinking about content and influence from the past. Light is a theme, not only the light used to produce the daguerreotype, but also the light streaming in here from the window. All right, so let's look at our next piece. This is Damier. And Damier here is creating a work that is the technique of lithograph. Lith is stone. Lith is stone. So this is a different technique process. Sorry, my daughter's texting me. All right, so title, Nader raising photography to the height of art. So Nader is the photographer. He is the guy pictured in the hot air balloon there. Damier, and the reason I put this in gold, Henri Damier, is people think that Nader, being a photographer, is the artist of this piece, but he's not, okay? He's not. Instead, the artist is the one who creates this print. So it is an artist creating a work of art about another artist. So Damier's our artist creating the work. Nader is the artist depicted in the work, okay? So this is a French cartoon. This is a cartoon in the same way that we would think of maybe a political cartoon or an image that would go in a newspaper, in this case, Le Journal, okay, newspaper, journal. And it's to be released to the public as a social commentary, So he's commenting on society in this moment. And it has the title on the piece, which is really nice if this showed up on the AP exam. So, Nader élevant la photographie à la hauteur de l'art, right? So, elevating photography to the height of art. And notice that every single business in this town, in Paris, is a photography studio. Well, of course, that's not true, right? This is a exaggeration that the artist, that Damier, is giving us to say, you know what, photography is everywhere. Well, it's not literally everywhere, but it's this idea of it taking over. So we have the River Seine, right? We have the cathedral, and he's floating up above it. Now, this is also a true story, a true event. So Nader was kind of the like Mad Hatter, crazy scientist of this time period. And he would get in a hot air balloon and float over Paris, taking photographs from his little makeshift darkroom that he's created in this hot air balloon of the streets of Paris. So he's really our first aerial photographer. And people thought he was crazy because he was eccentric. He would wear a black hat and coattails, and he would float around taking pictures. And so people are like, oh, there he goes again. So Damier is a printmaker. He's also a painter and a traditional stick media artist, but he's looking at this person as kind of an iconic figure in Paris at this moment. And so he is creating this cartoon in a just as a social commentary, again, for many people to be able to see. So that's what's happening here content wise. Okay, so let's talk about process and how this has changed. The colloidian method is a method that made exposure time short in terms of how long the plate could actually be left open. And it uses colloidal silver. So that's the process he's using as he is floating above the city. Now, remember, this is not like you guys taking your phone and taking a photo outside of a, airplane, right? Or whatever. This is him having to take all of these materials to process the plate up into the air with him, right? So that's why he looked a little crazy, as people are like, this is a whole lot of effort to get those shots, right? But no one else is doing it. They don't have another way to get these shots. So he's doing this. So he actually built a hot air balloon basket that functioned as a darkroom. It didn't look just like the one in our picture here. It was, a boxy small room, but it's the idea of it. All right, let's see if there's anything else here I was going to tell you about. And he just really liked hot air balloons. He also built in his studio in Paris. He had a big studio. He built some hot air balloons that were like miniature versions, like baskets, to stay inside of his studio. And he would paint sets for the background, like drop background cloth. And he would set up so it looked like someone could go in and they could stand, and I'll show you some of the pictures. They could stand in the hot air balloon basket and get their daguerreotype taken. And it looked like, pretend, I mean, this is pre-Photoshop, obviously. It looked kind of like they might be in a hot air balloon. And people would be like, oh my gosh, how'd you get that picture, right? And it's all just stage set. It's all theatrics, which is kind of funny. Okay, again, Nader, that's his nickname, but he is supposed to be seen here as kind of this crazy, nutty professor type. It is satirical, right? There aren't really this many photography studios in Paris. It's speaking to that idea of how prominent and widespread they are, but then it's also commenting on this debate, certainly among artists at this point in time, is photography art? Should we let photography artists into the salon, the Academy show, right? Oh, that's big time. Or should we even let them into galleries? Or is what they're doing a documentation utilizing a chemical process? Should they really just be, considered scientists, right? So this, I don't know, this debate was happening. This piece, this print that he made, the lithograph that Daumier made about Nader, was first shown in the newspaper Le Boulevard, which was in Paris at this time. So local paper, local print. So the audience would basically be all of Paris. A comical yet serious critique of the new medium of photography. Daumier's print illustrates some of the tensions between immediacy, hypermediacy, and remediation. Now, these are words you I don't know, I mean, how often you've thought about these words or if you've ever thought about these words. But I really liked this quote and this artistic, critical thought about what Daumier's doing here with this print. So immediacy is this idea that something is new, or that something is important because it's new, because it's contemporary, because it's happening now. So a great example of immediacy for us would be Bernie sitting in the chair at the inauguration, right? This image that we see, and we see it so much now, right? It's flooding social media and news and even probably text group and apps and websites, that it seems important, or it seems like something we should notice because it's saturating the visuals of what we're seeing right now. It's immediacy, it's everywhere. Hypermediacy is a practice that emphasizes process or performance, not the finished piece. So hypermediacy is one of the things that we try to push here in our studio program at Lovejoy. Is we're more concerned about process than we are product, right? So hypermediacy is the sense that it might be quick, it might not be technically excellent, but it's a representation of something happening now. And so as we look at Daumier's work, it's sketchy. It's not perfect proportions. It doesn't have exact lines and real attention to getting every little detail because it's capturing this moment. Hypermediacy. It's more concerned about the act of making it than how final and finished the piece is. And cartoons usually fall under that category of hypermediacy, right? They're not usually the most technically excellent art mediums. And then lastly, remediation. Remediation is this concept of a change in format, okay? Remediation, appropriating an idea, a content from one media to another. So a good example would be a movie based on a novel or a comic book. It's the same story, right? It's just told in a little different way. So if we talk about The Wizard of Oz, well, The Wizard of Oz is a movie, but before it was a movie, it was a book, right? By Frank Baum. And it's a little different, but it's kind of like the movie. And so then you go, oh, well, how many Wizard of Oz movies are there? Well, there's also an animated version, not just the Judy Garland version. It's the same content. The animated version is the same content as the original story, but remediation, it's gone through all of these subtle changes as that story and that line and the evolving of that narrative. And so that's also important because with remediation, we're looking at this and we're going, well, it's not a photograph, but it's all about photography, right? So those three kind of concepts of immediacy, hypermediacy, and remediation are really coming together in this piece. It is so relevant to this moment in time, right? Relevant. And so we'll revisit this occasionally as we're talking about a work that's very, very contemporary. The title is supposed to also be kind of an ironic wordplay because he's elevating photography to the height of art by literally floating up into the sky in a hot air balloon, right? He's elevating, but the elevation is also in saying, oh, photography is as important as art, right? So an elevation in the sense of the hierarchy of the arts, right? And then context, it's a time of great change. We talked about the fact that this industrialization period causes anxiety certainly as a whole, a societal kind of angst. And we'll see that angst big time when we jump into the 20th century. And so that could also be something dealt with here, is this idea of maybe we're growing and changing, too much is happening too fast. Daumier is known as an artist for capturing headline stories. Okay, so this is one of his famous pieces, Rue Transnonain, which is so it was a ghetto in Paris where workers of immigrants lived, and they inhabited these structures, these apartment buildings that were really like tenements. And someone had been accused of a crime, and I think it was shooting a police officer or hitting a police officer. I don't think there was a gun involved. I think it was some sort of altercation with an officer. And so the French National Guard, in response, went in and murdered everybody who was in that tenement apartment because one of them could have been the killer. It was this overreaction response to an event, handled very, very poorly. And then the French National Guard tries to lie about it and say, oh, it wasn't that bad. I mean, it was just a couple people. And so what Daumier does is, as kind of a photojournalist, right at this moment before photography is really that, yes, it's everywhere as a portrait, but in the moment, photojournalism is not happening yet. So he went in and he did a series of prints showing the gruesomeness and the brutality of this event by the French National Guard. And so he has a woman, a father, there's a baby under here, and an old man, all murdered for no reason, right? Just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time in their home, right? So we certainly can see Nadir, elevating photography to the height of art. We can see Rue Transnonon. We can see these depictions of contemporary events as a documentation of what's happening in reality versus what the government's allowing to be seen, and commenting on that. So again, commenting on a contemporary event is something he's doing. Good, bad, ugly. Okay, so this is Nadir, some of his selfies, if you will, some of his self-portraits. So there's the series, and then there they are put together as a GIF, so you can see them turning. Nadir shot a lot of portraits of artists. So Courbet, Gustave Courbet, remember Courbet painted the Stonebreakers, and we had his self-portrait as a younger man, or he's like real intensely coming into the canvas. Courbet said that he was the best artist that's ever existed, the most arrogant man in all of Paris, better than any painter so far, would only paint what he actually saw. Remember, he was asked to paint angels, and he said, I don't see any angels around here. Right? Only paints what he sees, Mr. Courbet, communist, really into the writings of the Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto. Edward Manet, I love Manet. I love all these artists. Edward Manet is going to bridge us from realism to impressionism. He's going to be one of our bridge artists, so we'll talk about him soon. He is the master of black paint. Okay. Eugene Delacroix, we talked about Delacroix, and I showed you all this picture of the hand inside vest. This is the painter Delacroix, Mr. Color, of Liberty Leading the People of the Parisian Revolution of July of 1830. And then Claude Monet. Monet is our one of our Impressionist painters. Most famous for water lilies. We'll be looking at his painting of a train station. And then Nadir, one of his selfies. He liked to pose in a lot of different ways for selfies. So thanks to Nadir, we have quite a few shots of artists where you can actually see what they look like. This is Nadir over here on the left, just by himself, and then Nadir and his wife together. She looks really happy. This is the theater set that I was telling you about that he set up in his studio. And so you would climb into this basket that is hanging from joist in the ceiling. He had a painted sky behind you, and you would get this picture made, and then you'd show it to friends, and friends would be like, oh my gosh, how did somebody take this picture? When did you own a hot air balloon? And so it was supposed to be like really, really early staging, right? Photoshopping without the technology. So those are kind of fun. This is his studio in Paris in 1860. It's now, I think, department store with apartments on top. But you can see his signature there. He had his own whole 4-story studio space where he would sell, of course, his daguerreotype, his photographs. But then, well, it was an improvement upon daguerreotype, but his early photographs, but then also where he had his rooms to meet with people and his kind of stage setups and that kind of thing. These are some of the photos he took from his hot air balloon, looking out over Paris. He's pretty high up, right? Pretty high up. So the Arc de Triomphe, Grand Boulevard, all from his balloon. All right, so we are going to finish up photography with this piece for a while anyway. This is The Horse in Motion by Edward Muybridge. Kind of a funny name. Again, just early photography is your culture, but this is actually American. And this is a newer process, right? So we saw the daguerreotype, we saw the colloidal method, which is what Nadir was using, and Damier was drawing him using it, the colloidian method. This is the albumen print method, albumen, and it is an even shorter, faster exposure. So the horse in this picture, this series of pictures, it kind of looks like, I don't know, like a silhouette almost. We're not getting a ton of detail of the horse, but the horse's name is Sally Gardner. Sally Gardner. And Sally Gardner was owned by Leland Stanford of Stanford University. And this plate, this picture, this series of cards gives us so much information, which is really nice. So it says running at a 140 gait, that's the speed, at the Palo Alto track, the 19th of June, 1878. So we have exactly when this was, photographed, how fast the horse was going, who the horse is. The horse is being ridden by a jockey. So Muybridge took the photos and then he arranged them as this kind of series to be presented as a work of art. But the intention behind the piece, his reason for creating this, was he was hired by Stanford, Leland Stanford, to win a bet. And Stanford had made a bet with a friend of his, some other rich guy. And the rich guy's, this other rich guy, Stanford's friend, said there is no way that a horse's legs, all four of them, leave the ground at one time. There's no way. There always has to be a foot on the ground, right? When the horse is running. And Stanford was like, I don't think you're right. I think that when a horse is running, all of its feet leave the ground at one time, right? And because they didn't have quick photography at their access or video, there was no way to say who was right and who was wrong. So Leland Stanford hired Muybridge to take a series of photos so that he could win this bet. Now, the first time he tried, the camera and the photography method was not fast enough to capture the horse going this fast clearly. And so they actually had to wait a few years. So he made a first attempt. They had to wait a few years and then came back and got it figured out and was able to do this. So he did this using a series of tripwires and of cameras set up around the track to capture these images. Now, don't write this in your note. This is just a little free story. But in the time between when Muybridge was first asked by Stanford to capture, this image, and the time he was actually able to do that, right? That period of time. During that period of time, Muybridge found out his wife was cheating on him. So Muybridge went and attacked and killed his wife's lover. Might have actually killed his wife. I don't remember, but killed his wife's lover. And then, strangely, and then went to Mexico for a while and then came back. He'd been through a lot. I think he also had a head injury on some sort of like rough trip. He had some issues, obviously. But then he got the pictures and Stanford used these to win his bet. So here's a GIF putting the images together by Muybridge. And so you can see that, yes, clearly a horse's feet all leave at one time at once. They're all up. So let's talk about some innovations here. Each one of your photographs should have innovation as a theme for sure. So advancements in photography. No more chemical preparation for those plates. You can, at this point in time, you can buy plates already prepared by a chemist. And so that makes it a lot easier. Photography is going to start being able to be used by regular people. Okay. Exposure time has been greatly changed. Remember how we started off, exposure time was 8 hours, then 20 seconds. Now it's 1/25 of a second. Okay. So much, much quicker exposure. This requires less need of a tripod because the image doesn't, or the camera doesn't have to be as perfectly still for so long. And it's almost instantaneous as the photo is being taken. And there's a photograph of Muybridge. Very happy looking gentleman. Angry man, for sure. All right, that is it for today. I will hopefully see you guys on Wednesday. I plan to be here. So we'll see you later.